Start slowly. Still people joining. Welcome to this second webinar in a series that we have become accustomed to calling We Are as an acronym. We Are stands for Webinars on Artistic Research Education. It is more precisely the overarching theme is how to empower students and teachers / supervisors, that's what we talk about today, to engage in artistic research at higher music education institutions. My name is Stefan Gies. As the long-standing executive director of AEC, I was, among others, from the very beginning involved in implementing this idea. And in my now post-retirement position, so to say, as AEC senior advisor, I'm still trying to keep the ball rolling. The first webinar in this We Are series took place in March this year. For those who missed it, you can still find it on the web. I will post the link in the chat in a minute. This first webinar was on artistic research as an element of curriculum development. So for the second series, we have chosen a slightly more specific topic, and I'm very pleased that we were able to have Stephen Broad with us to conduct this webinar today. Stephen is Director of Research and Engagement at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Glasgow. He is a long-standing member and current chair of the AEC EPARM working group. And at the very moment, he is in the position of a visiting professor at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. So he's joining us from over the ocean and very early in the morning for him. Warm welcome to Stephen.
As Stefan said, this webinar is slightly more specific in its focus than the previous webinar. And we're going to focus on research supervision, where I think it's generally true to say it is a complex practice. And from the perspective of students, if we were to go by online things like PhD Life, which parody the experience of a doctoral student, we might say that from a student's perspective, it seems it's not always done terribly well. But there is an increasing focus on research supervision as a professional practice in its own right, clearer expectations on supervisors, a kind of collegial acknowledgement of some of the challenges, and more formal training, onboarding, and accreditation opportunities. Fundamentally, I think it's fair to say that subject expertise is no longer considered the sole criterion for becoming a doctoral supervisor. Now, of course, the situation in artistic research is distinctive, is interestingly different from other research domains. With artistic research rooted in practice, questions emerging from practice, practice as a method, the outcomes of the research sometimes being expressed, at least in part, in practice, the realities of supervision can feel quite different. Add to that artistic research is methodologically plural, by which I mean we have a magpie's tendency to grab shiny things that we find, the ideas and the methods from a wide range of other disciplines. Artistic research is also still young, and that has practical implications. Some people will be fed up with hearing that it's a young discipline, but it can't be denied that we lack the luxury of generations of experienced supervisors to turn to, that sense of embedded practice over decades and decades. And some of these different aspects of artistic research come together in particular ways. So, for example, team supervision, the use of the bringing together of a team of academics with different perspectives and different kinds of expertise, that's become almost the norm in artistic research, just as it's become more common in doctoral supervision generally. But it's become so important in artistic research because, in a sense, those different perspectives are needed. We sometimes need to bring together a panel with people with different backgrounds because there is no one person who has all of the background and all of the experience that's necessary. And that sometimes involves researchers from other domains like musicology or performance science or psychology, social science, being brought into our supervision teams, and those with important professional artistic practice but less experience of research also being part of those teams. Finally, I think with a still young research domain, new artistic researchers, having completed their doctorates, are sometimes brought into supervision teams perhaps more quickly than they might be in other disciplines. All of these things are challenging, but we could summarize them all by saying that there's a tendency for artistic research supervision in particular to push supervisors out of their comfort zones, whether the comfort zone is a previous discipline or the whole experience of research in itself. So the idea of going out of the comfort zone is one of the things I'd really like to address in this webinar as much as possible. The other thing I'd like to address, though, is a tendency, even where teams exist, for research supervision generally to be a rather lonely experience. It can be difficult to open up to peers about the challenges of supervision. Somehow it seems you can feel very vulnerable as a supervisor addressing those challenges, whatever they are, whether they are intellectual, artistic, or pastoral. And this is especially true when we find ourselves pushed out of our comfort zones without something to fall back on. But I think a community of supervisors can really support this, can really ameliorate this problem. And I hope that this webinar can perhaps begin to help establish a bit of a community. So what we're going to do, we're going to consider first of all some of the fundamentals of supervision generally and in the context of artistic research. And we're going to do that in discussion. We'll then have a look at some resources that are available to support you as a supervisor, and we'll then consider the particular issue of being part of a supervisory team. I think many of the issues that we grapple with as supervisors of artistic research projects are honestly little different from those faced by supervisors in other disciplines. They may have a particular complexion, and there may be particular areas of difficulty, but I'm not sure they're fundamentally different. You may disagree, and that perhaps is something to discuss. But in our two discussion sessions today, the key thing is there are no wrong answers, wrong opinions. I think the fundamental thing here is about sharing expertise and different perspectives. So we're going to go into the first of the two discussion sessions, and this is essentially around student needs and the foundations of supervision. We have small group discussions, as I say, as Stefan pointed out, you'll be popped into a breakout group. But to try to bring some focus to this, I have come up with a number of questions that I'd like you to consider. And as I said, there are no right or wrong answers to these questions. They're for consideration in a group. Some of them deal with supervision practice generally, and some of them with the more specific instance of artistic research. Let me go through the questions that will shape this first session, and it's up to your facilitator in each room to decide exactly how you deal with this. But here are those focus questions. Firstly, how often does your student need to see you? And who should be responsible for keeping in touch? That's question one. Question two, what sort of supervisory support do artistic research students need in the early stages of research? Question three, what sorts of feedback do artistic research students need, and what sort should you give? Might not be the same thing, I'm not sure. Question four, how important is it for the supervisor to know, quote, the rules of the game? And by that, I mean program and examination requirements, for example, student support mechanisms, all of those sorts of things, the rules of the game, broadly conceived. Question 5, how much do students need your artistic expertise and or subject knowledge? How important is that artistic expertise and subject knowledge? And the final question, teacher, mentor, coach, project manager, critic, Svengali, what sorts of roles do artistic research students need you to take? Yeah, I hope you had a good discussion. I was really struck by the fact that despite our group having people from different institutions, different nations and different continents, each with their different requirements and expectations, and yet there was an awful lot to share. I mean, there was just so much to share right at the very beginning. So that's great. Okay, so we're going to move on to a consideration of some of the resources that are available to support doctoral supervisors. I'm going to take 15 minutes or so to go through some resources. It is true, I think, to say that there are now many good quality resources to support supervisory practice generally. These don't refer to the specific case of artistic research in many cases, but for that we shouldn't discount them for that reason. I don't think. And I'm going to review some of the generic resources first, and then turn to some specific artistic research resources. Now, this is a personal selection. It's not been subject to a rigorous quality control. It's really just some things that I have spotted and found useful for myself. And there is undoubtedly a UK bias, which reflects the fact that that is where I'm based, but also maybe reflects the fact that UK academia has been worrying away at the quality of doctoral supervision for some time, and so therefore there have been various different resources put in place as a result. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see what I have in front of me. So the first place I'm going to is the UK Council for Graduate Education. And if I can, I will put the link for this in the chat so that you can find it. And also we can make all of these links available later on so that you can see them. So the UK Council for Graduate Education does essentially what it says. It's not a statutory body, it's a body offering advice and support for graduate studies. And they offer an accreditation framework for supervision, regardless of discipline. This is their Research Supervision Recognition Programme, as it says at the top of this screen. Now, the reason I picked this one out, and the reason I think it is useful, is that it provides a framework which includes a very wide range of skills and attitudes that relate to doctoral supervision, including, but going beyond, crucially, going beyond subject knowledge and expertise. And if I take a little look down, you can see the sorts of things that are included here. Now, just to explain, each of these areas is part of the UK Council's framework, but underneath it explains the different levels of accreditation. We don't need to worry about that. The interesting thing here, I think, is that the different aspects of the framework. So in other words, what might supervisors need to know and do in terms of the recruitment and selection of doctoral students, their relationships with candidates, their relationships with other supervisors. This, of course, is noting the growth of team supervision, which we'll discuss in a bit more detail. How they support projects, feedback, monitoring and progress, wider personal, professional and career development, and of course the exam, final completion and exams, dissemination and then practice. And so in these 10 areas, I think you can see this realization of the idea that doctoral supervision is a wide-ranging, multivalent practice. It's not, it goes far beyond individual subject expertise. I find this both demanding in the sense that there's a very, very wide range of things here. It's demanding, but it's also kind of reassuring because it suggests the range of support that can be offered to a candidate outside the disciplinary comfort zone. So in other words, I've found myself in a supervision relationship with people who are doing projects that I only have a very small disciplinary expertise with. I'm just being honest. And in fact, my ability to support their projects, well, it can be a bit managerial rather than intellectual. But I can provide good support in so many other aspects and ensure that the whole process is working as well as can be. Now, the author of this framework is also the author of a handbook for doctoral students. So there's a whole kind of textbook there, which is also really interesting. And there are various guides for doctoral supervisors also available from the UK Council for Graduate Education. Sticking with the UK, I also want to highlight the work of VITAI, which is a member organisation that, where's my chat function gone? A member organisation that supports member institutions with the professional development of their staff. This is nice in as much as it has lots of very specific advice and hints and follow-up resources. And you can see the sorts of issues that are being addressed. Many of them map across to the UK Council, but you'll also see that there are very specific bits of advice. Here, for example, in the section on supervising and supporting is recognition of the slump, the idea that at some point in the process, candidates can lose momentum and lose motivation. How do we deal with that? And there are certain resources there to look at. I'm going to keep going. Now, next one will seem terribly specific, but I think it's rather good, which is why I have kept it. So, very specifically, Reading University have produced a good practice guide for supervising PhDs. And although this is extremely local, you know, it's one university in one nation, it's got highly practical suggestions and is particularly good at covering the bumps in the road of the PhD. Now here, if you look at this contents page, you can see the sorts of issues that are addressed: supervising international students, supervising part-time students. Certainly in my own institution, we have many part-time students and their needs are different from those who are in the position of studying full-time. The ups and downs of being a PhD, you know, this is a very real guide, I would say. Well, going from the very specific, I also want to point you towards a much more international guide. So this is one that was created by an organization called GoGN, which deals with, it's a global network of open educators. And this guide, which is 111 pages long, it's really huge, looks at doctoral supervision in very great detail. It's wonderfully detailed, and I think a particularly attractive aspect of it, from my point of view, is that it's been compiled by a really large number of international contributors. I think there's a list at the beginning somewhere, which gives you a sense of the different nations that have been involved. You can see a number of contributors from Canada and the United States, from across Europe, from the UK. There is a North American orientation. That's absolutely fine, but you can see that it has really been a kind of a global effort. I particularly appreciate the friendly and practical approach this takes. And there's a lovely section, let me just see if I can easily find it, on the different identities. Here we are, 20, 22, 23, the different identities that research supervisors might have to take in the process of supervision. And of course, I was thinking about this when I came up with the different identities in that first discussion session. So this guy talks about the model. You know, the supervisor is someone who sets professional and academic standards. The mentor, read them all. The manager, the muse, the mediator. I didn't take that one up in my question for you in the first round, but there we are. The motivator, encouraging persistence and resilience. I mean, how often is that necessary? It's absolutely core in my experience. And I think by naming all of these different identities is something really helpful in making external something that perhaps most of us would feel only internally. And then finally, I would like to highlight a project that's not yet reported, but which has taken place in the UK, and it's fun. The thing that's interesting about this is it's funded by so many different agencies. It's intended, I think, to create a kind of a gathering point for resources. And this is the Next Generation Research Supervision Project, or RSVP, very nice acronym. And this has not yet reported, so this is essentially a kind of holding page, but it's been a very well financed project with the specific aim of looking at where research supervision should go from now. Now, sadly, the partners don't include an institution that deals with artistic research, but the project lead has certainly worked with the project lead, and she's certainly aware of artistic research as a particular area, and I think it's worth looking for what comes out of that project. Okay, so I hope I didn't need to give too many excuses for pointing you in the direction of these generic resources, but I think so often we can feel that we're pioneers, that we're doing something without a professional network, without the resources that might be available to other professionals. And actually, there are good quality resources of different kinds out there, if you can dig them out. Now, I did say this is not a quality reviewed selection. This is a sort of personal selection of things I found interesting, but I hope they may be of some use to you. Now, more specifically, in the context of artistic research, I want to point out 3 or 4 different resources that are worth knowing about. The first of these is the products of the Advancing Supervision for Artistic Research Doctorates project, which was led by Ilya and the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. It ran from 2018 to 2021 and was an Erasmus Plus strategic project. And we're going to hear about a couple of other Erasmus Plus strategic projects. But this was very specifically about the supervision of artistic research doctorates, but beyond the specific disciplinary context of music. And there's some really nice resources of different kinds here, each resource led by a different member of the consortium that pursued the project. This marries together, this project, I think, marries together many of the issues identified in the generic materials on supervision with some of the more specific concerns of artistic research, albeit with a wider focus than music alone. Some really nice resources around mind mapping the different aspects of supervision, and some scenarios which are acted out for you to consider. There's all sorts of nice things to explore there. Moving on, I was going to show you. I was going to point you towards the Rap Lab project, which is one of the immediate predecessors of RA of our initiative, one of the two strategic partnerships which have really led to this initiative. Unfortunately, this morning I can't get the RAP Lab website to work, so we need to have a wee look at that. It was working yesterday, but for me it won't work this morning. But RAP Lab was another Erasmus Plus strategic partnership. It was led by the Hochschule für Musik und Dance in Cologne with the AEC. And it was specifically looking at how some of the methods of artistic research can inflect and refresh professional practice in music, supporting creative responses to particular societal and economic challenges. It wasn't necessarily the intention of RAP Lab to support the supervision of artistic research projects, but I think it's quite a useful bridge into that. It offers a lot of helpful bridging stuff. Oh, thank you, Stefan, that's great. That's a different link into RAP Lab information. I'd also like to mention REACT, which is the second of the two predecessor initiatives. So REACT, again, a strategic partnership. These strategic partnerships have been incredibly helpful. But REACT, almost a partner to RAP Lab, dealing with very similar issues. But rather than applying artistic research techniques to professional practice, REACT was looking at how artistic research approaches might reshape learning and teaching in higher music education. Now, again, it doesn't deal specifically with the supervision of artistic research, but it does, I think, provide a really useful bridge, especially for those who are coming to artistic research supervision from a teaching background, because it reflects so much on learning and teaching. And then finally, I just want to point out part of the Orpheus Institute's web pages. This is very, the Orpheus Institute has been in the vanguard of artistic research since it was founded back in the 90s. And they have an excellent website, but part of that website is labeled education. And on this part of the website, you can find links to materials from various different partnership projects that are relevant to supervisory practice, including the Advancing Supervision project that I already mentioned with ILIA and the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and RAP Lab. But I specifically want to mention the MOOC that's here, the Massive Open Online Course, which Orpheus developed about 6 years ago or so, 7 years ago. There we are. This MOOC, which is open to anyone to take part in, is a really significant resource. And particularly if you're coming to artistic research from other experiences, the MOOC is designed to lay down practical advice and guidance towards developing a research proposal. And you can see the extent of the resource here and the people who are involved. In fact, some of these people might even be here today. Yes, at least one of them is. It's free to enroll, and it's the kind of thing that you can do as a sort of, you can do at your own pace, and which is relevant even if the specific purpose of the MOOC to produce a research proposal is not your intention. It still contains so much that's of value. Goodness, thank you. Okay, that's a sort of whistle-stop tour. And I don't know how many of those resources you might already be aware of, perhaps all of them. But I think for me, the thing I take from it is that there is stuff out there. And while it can feel so often that you're negotiating every corner of a supervisory experience by yourself, actually there's a lot of material that can help, that can provide you that support when you don't have someone else to bounce ideas off. Let's move on. And in the second part of the webinar, we're going to focus on the question of team supervision. I think it's fair to say that traditionally in the arts and humanities, supervision was a solo mission. Supervision in the sciences has, in general, had a slightly different complexion, often involving a single supervisor, but a team of students. But in the arts and humanities, it has tended to be a one-to-one relationship historically. Generally, however, over the last 20 to 25 years or so, there has been a move to team supervision, meaning a team of staff or faculty supervisors or advisors who are charged with working to support a particular student. Now, usually there'll be one principal supervisor or some similar title who has particular administrative responsibilities. But the intention, of course, is that the multiple perspectives of the individuals on the team are brought to bear on the project. This is very different from the experience that I had as a doctoral student, which was, I caricature slightly, but it was really a glass of sherry once a term in the supervisor's room. Really, that was almost the extent of it. The move to team supervision has occurred in many, perhaps most disciplines, and some of the resources that I mentioned before the break, they specifically address it. But as it happens, that change in wider academia has occurred, has coincided almost exactly with the development of artistic research doctorates. And I think it has special significance in the context of artistic research, where experienced artistic research supervisors are not so many, and the projects tend to draw on ideas and methods from other disciplines, whether they are self-consciously inter or trans or multidisciplinary projects, or just because, as I said earlier, magpie-like, the ideas and methods of other fields attract us. They have something to offer our understanding of artistic practice. So it's become pretty common to establish supervisory teams that combine staff with different expertise, with different professional practices, and also, I think, with varying degrees of familiarity with research, with varying degrees of comfort with the identity of researcher. Now, sometimes this is just pure pragmatism, the only way to support a student in a particular institutional context. That's fair enough, and I recognize that from my own experience. But it's also potentially incredibly exciting. The scope to forge new amalgams of expertise, to explore insights that are not otherwise available, it is potentially hugely exciting. But whether the team emerges for purely pragmatic, practical reasons, or whether it has more of an intellectual basis, it requires, I think, particular skills on the part of the supervisors to manage their different perspectives to the benefit of the students. And I put that in a really proactive way, to manage their different perspectives. I think it's something that's incumbent on supervisors in a team to make it work for the student. Now, some supervisors on a team might feel pretty confident of their skills, but that confidence can be, in my experience, quite easily shaken when you're in a multidisciplinary context, when people have different perspectives that they're bringing. And I think it's fair to say that team supervision is something that quite quickly pushes us out of our comfort zones, sometimes in a really wonderful way. It does require some careful management, a curious combination on the part of the supervisors in the team, a curious combination of confidence to hold your own, to say what you think, and humility to let other people's voices come through. Confidence and humility both focused on the student, and a willingness to share the responsibility for the student as well as the work of supervision. Those things are not the same. Let's share that responsibility for the student. Now, in some jurisdictions, senior students are joining supervisory teams, which I think is an enormously exciting thing to have happen, and something I want to try and develop in my home institution. But here we're going to focus on staff faculty members, on supervisory teams charged with looking after students. So we're going to have another 25-minute discussion around the realities of team supervision. And what I've got for you for this discussion, which will also be in small groups as per the previous, are 3 scenarios from the perspective of particular members of a supervisory team. You'll be told what that perspective is. Sometimes the perspective of a musicologist on the team, sometimes a perspective, you'll get it. From the different perspectives, each scenario involving imagined students in different situations. Now, in each case, there is an initial scenario for you to consider and discuss. When you've had a chance to do that and everyone's said their piece, there's a second part of the scenario to chew on. So it's a sense of here's what happened first, what might we do? And then here's what happened next, and what might we do now? I hope you found the discussion helpful in those groups. As I said right at the beginning, the idea of this webinar was not really to share pearls of wisdom or anything like that, but just to have an opportunity to share experiences and in some ways to build confidence from knowing that other people are going through some of the same things. I'd like to just give you the opportunity to make any comments or ask any questions of colleagues before we close. Anyone have anything they want to address in the plenary? Denise.
I'd just like to say thank you, because it can very often feel quite isolating being a supervisor. And especially in a conservatoire like ours, where in a way the performance teaching takes precedence. So it can sometimes feel like a lonely place being the academic supervisor. So this has been really encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. Well, I mean, I think we all need that encouragement sometimes. I know I do. As I say, I hope this can be the beginning of something a little more sustained. I think all I need to do now, just before I hand back to Stefan to wrap things up, is just to thank the facilitators. I really appreciate what you've done this morning. As Emiliano, Elisa, Theodore, Gabriela and Giovanni, really thank you very much, especially dealing with my complex scenarios. And also to say thank you to Bea for all of the work in the background and making it happen. Stefan is the red thread through all of this. And Stefan, thank you to you, and I hand back to you to finish.
No, I thank you very much, Stephen, for this wonderful webinar, and I wish you a wonderful autumn. Have a good time. Thanks for joining, and my last thank you goes to the participants. Without you, that would have been nothing, and for your contributions. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.